since Luck retired, there are 10 different quarterbacks that have started games, and that number will soon become 11 as Shane Steichen has named Daniel Jones as a team starter, quote, for the season after he beat Anthony Richardson in a quarterback competition over the off-season and training camp. Did this move surprise you?
I look at all the names on that defense, and it's like I play a little bit of IDP, and I'm like, yeah, I would quite like all of them. So that's I feel like I've drafted all of them at least once.
He's had 5 years as a college starter. He's like the opposite of Anthony Richardson. He's had 5 years as a college starter. He's been in multiple schools. He's had multiple offenses. He has literally seen so much, which is what you want for a rookie coming into a team like this. Now Trevor Lawrence is free from Press Taylor, and because Doug Peterson didn't even, the fact that he didn't even at one point think I'm going to take over calling plays or anything, it's just crazy how a man of that much, he's won a Super Bowl and yet he doesn't even think, this offense is failing. Why am I not taking over play calling or whatever like that? Anyway, so now they've got a competent offensive play caller in there for Trevor Lawrence, which he's not had. He's either had literally he's not had that.
No, and you were thinking who was before that? Urban Meyer. Move on, please.
Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judy, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL Podcast.
NFL opening night is just 2 weeks away, and the final week of the preseason is now underway. So it's now time to get really excited about the return of the NFL. I'm Sam Moores, and you are listening to the 14 Yards NFL podcast. And on today's episode, we will continue our 2025 division preview series by looking into the AFC South. And I'm joined by a brilliant guest from our very own 14 Yards Network. He's the sort of resident fantasy football expert for 14 Yards, a regular guest on several of our podcasts over the past few seasons as well. I'm delighted to welcome James Fotheringham back to the podcast again. Can you believe how close we are to the season now? It's gone quite quickly, hasn't it?
Yeah, I looking at the amount of fantasy drafts I've got and the amount of evenings taken up by those, I'm very much can tell I'm very close to the start of the season. All the live drafts are starting to fire in, and all the madness that is players rising ridiculously due to hype, due to preseason and training. So there's definitely signs that we're close.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I'm doing right now, I'm doing 2 or 3 slow drafts at the moment. So it's very much like, my life has been taken over by fantasy the last couple of weeks as well. And, we're now entering the second half of this series. And as we did in the first 4 episodes, we'll start the podcast by looking back to last year first before analysing each of the 4 teams in the division and predicting their win total for the season. Now this time last year, I was really, really excited for this division, the AFC South. And, in our Hot Takes episode, me and Liam did this before last season. I said that I thought it could be the most competitive division in football. And oh, wow, I was wrong. The Texans stormed to the division title for the second straight season, making the playoffs as the AFC's number 4 seed at 10-7, despite having one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL last year. Obviously, a lot of noise was made about the Texans' offense in preseason last year, with many calling them like a sort of dark horse Super Bowl contender after the additions of Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon to a unit that was cooking towards the end of CJ Stroud's rookie season, obviously winning that playoff game. But it was actually the defense that ended up leading them to the playoffs and winning another playoff game against the Chargers. It was the Colts who came second in the division at 8-9. Again, for the Colts, they were somewhat high their hopes this time last year because everyone thought Anthony Richardson would look like a disaster coming out of college, and his first few games he was actually quite composed, and Shane Steichen did really well to coach to his strengths. But then he got injured, and his play sort of went downhill after that. Yeah, and then before that, he went down with a shoulder injury. And then on his return, Richardson really struggled massively. He looked more at the pass he was in college last year, completing just 47.7% of his passes and missing another 7 games due to injury, as the Colts produced their 3rd season in 4 years with either 8 or 9 wins. So the Colts have been the same team for the last couple of years. After bottling the division in 2023, going from pretty much AFC one seed contenders at 8-3 to missing the playoffs at 9-8. a major microscope was pretty much hovering over the Jags this time last year. And wow, did that collapse continue? It was their 30th season as a franchise, and it'll be one that will be remembered for all the wrong reasons, as they finished 4-13 after general manager Trent Baalke failed to address their big weakness, which was the offensive line. Trevor Lawrence was getting hit left, right, and centre everywhere due to having an offensive line that allowed 9 pressures a game before he saw his season ended by a concussion in Week 13 against the Texans. And then eventually Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke would lose their jobs in January. And then in last place were the Titans, who had the worst record in the NFL last year at 3-14. After moving on from sort of Mike Vrabel and Derek Henry in that era last year, they decided to have a little bit of a quick free agency rebuild around 2023 second round pick. Will Levis spending the second highest amount of that offseason, which is a lot, is around 300 million or so. With injuries to key players, offensive line play was poor despite hiring Bill Callahan, and even poorer quarterback play. Brian Callahan's season, his first season, did not go very well, and they've now, well, they ended up number 1 overall draft pick. They've got a new quarterback, and and they, heading into this year, new general manager too, they look a complete different team as well. The Texans have been aggressive once more to try and push for a title while CJ Stroud is on his rookie contract. The Titans and Colts have new starting quarterbacks, which we'll get into in a little bit, and the Jags have a new head coach and general manager too. What do you make of this division heading into this year? Do you think it'll be sort of more competitive than last year because every team seems to be in the right direction, you could say?
I don't know if competitive with each other, but I think the Texans are still going to be a little bit clear. It's one of those. I think this might actually be the division with the most intrigue in terms of you have 3 teams that very much could do anything. You think the Texans should just about hold station, win the division, and be there or thereabouts, and still not have enough to get through the playoffs, particularly. That's the one thing that seems like it should be consistent, but the other 3 could amount to anything. And you like that in a division sometimes, in that, I don't know what the betting markets are doing at the moment, but I can imagine put your money on the one with the best odds, the one that they're all sort of backing to fail, because it's probably as good a chance as any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what happens beyond the Texans should be interesting because, well, we see it most years. These teams do beat up on each other. It's very rare that a team goes 5-0, 5-1, 6-0 in division. They do beat each other, and that I don't think any of these teams are going to have 4-5 wins. I can see them all being around the 6-7 at least range, and then and then being able to beat everyone. And we'll start off with those Texans, as you mentioned. They are the big favourites of the division. We'll start the division winner from last year, as we have done every episode of the series. Now they're an interesting team going into this year because it feels like they sort of underwhelmed last year, but they actually achieved the same feat they did in the year before, where everyone had all the hype. Where they reached the division round, they won a wild card game, but they did it in a completely different way. I think the sort of why everyone was a little bit underwhelmed because CJ Stroud had, with the way he played in 2023, obviously the emergence of the young defensive stars like Derek Stingley, Will Anderson. There was a lot of hype about this team. Many see these next few years as like an opportunity for Houston to win a championship, right? While Stroud is on his rookie deal, and it last year sort of underwhelmed a little bit. So there have been some changes in this Texans organisation, starting with D'Amico Ryans firing Bobby Slowick, who did a great job in the first year of this sort of partnership with CJ Stroud, and in the second year the offense just wasn't the same. So he has hired a new offensive coordinator in Nick Caley, who brings over from the Rams. They've also refreshed their receiver core as well. Moving on from Stephon Diggs, who was the big acquisition a year ago, and in his place bringing in Christian Kirk, before adding another 2 receivers high in the draft as well. Those guys were second-round pick Jaden Higgins and third-round pick Jalen Noel, both of whom come from Iowa State, and they're expected to have big roles because Tank Dell was set to miss the year because of the knee injury he suffered at the end of last year. And after the offensive line allowed the second most sacks in the NFL last year, GM Nick Caserio has made some major changes to the offensive line, moving on from former All-Pro left tackle Laramie Tunsil and former first-round pick guard Kenyon Green. 3 new tackles have come in Trent Brown, Cam Robinson, and second-round pick Ariante Ursary, whilst they also added Laken Tomlinson, the former 49er 49ers guy at guard. They're moves that sort of had to be made because of the big regression on the offensive side of the ball last year. What do you make of their off season?
I like to retract my earlier comment about consistency and explain the fact that with that offensive line, I still think it'll probably actually be the same outcome, to be fair. It's a lot of turnover, but ultimately, I still think they are pretty much status quo in terms of they've not certainly, the players they've lost. Yes, Tunsil is obviously a bit of a blow, but reality is the places that a week before they've got a bit of a sort of a question mark, which is better than being rubbish. So they could be good. They can't be any worse than what they were, which is probably what you want to hear as a Texans fan, is that your offensive line can't be any worse than it was. In terms of the receiving corps, this is where, especially with the fantasy brain, it's interesting. Nico Collins is obviously one of the, he's already becoming an elite wide receiver in the league and is rated that way in fantasy as well. Christian Kirk is an underrated signing. I think if it wasn't for the fact of how stupid his contract looked in Jacksonville, I actually think he'd be rated a lot higher. I think just because the Jags overpaid him so much, they sort of overhyped him and he underdelivered. Whereas for the player that he actually is, for the role that he's about to go into, which is essentially that team's wide receiver 2 in terms of their veteran wide receiver 2, I think that he's perfect for that team in that position. And then you've got your 2 rookies in Higgins and Knoll who are going to be wild cards. And I fear for a lot of people who are hyping the pair of them up, well, especially Higgins, I don't think there's an awful lot of hype over Knoll at the moment, even though he only went around later. But I think that's a lot of it is because you already have 3 wide receivers ahead of him, and Higgins is seen, but everyone's already, mounting Higgins on a pedestal as wide receiver 2 in that team.
I think it's because
I think it's going to take time.
Yeah, I think it's because he's basically a first-round pick for them. Like, it was a very early second-round pick. The Texans didn't have a first-round pick because they went to get 2 second-round picks this year, and they gave him a fully guaranteed contract as well, as if he was a first-round pick. So I think that might be where it is. Where
a lot of the hype coming from. It's all the talk I've heard from camp though is that Kirk is still way ahead of him, and I'm not even like saying that it's like, oh, it's a battle. It's not even apparently a battle. It's just Kirk is the 2, Higgins is effectively the 3. So it depends how they really want to use them in the offensive system. The one thing we haven't talked about, and I think is going to be a major, major talking point with the Texans, is Joe Mixon. Because he is currently on the PUP, so he's currently not slated to be able to play, has had a mystery foot injury throughout the whole of the offseason, and no one truly knows what the situation is, and no one's really willing to give a timeline, which for a lot of people rings massive alarm bells, because whenever that happens, it usually means it's more serious than they want to tell us. And the fact that they then went out and signed Nick Chubb, having been released from the Browns, when they already have Dameon Pierce and drafted Woody Marks in the 4th, suggests that they're expecting to need some running back help, especially in the short term. So I won't be surprised if Chubb's starting the season and we hear some news that Mixon's either going to start the season on the PUP and miss the first at least 4 weeks, but potentially be missing longer. And what that then does, downgraded from Mixon, who was really good last year when he was playing, down to Nick Chubb, who is still coming off that major injury he had. And, we don't know what he's going to be like in the new system, what he's going to be like setting up. I think teams are going to pretty much be concentrating a lot of their efforts on Collins, Kirk, Higgins, etc. And whilst there'll be running room there, I think that, there's a chance the Titans get stifled a little bit. Texans get stifled a little bit more. I mean, to be fair, it wouldn't surprise me if the Titans get stifled in the same way, the way that they played last season.
I'm about to say with Chubb, everything I'm reading sounds like he's at a really good camp, which is really
him too.
Which is really good.
To be honest, I have a feeling that they would have hyped him up regardless, because they're preparing their own fan base for the blow when Mixon's ruled out. Or that's my assumption, is that there just doesn't seem to be a likely scenario where Mixon plays week 1.
Yeah, I
Otherwise,
I
we
agree
would
with you
have
there.
had some kind of news suggesting that. I think, and I've got a fear that it could be one of those half-season jobs where he doesn't come back until like week 10, and he's still a step off the pace. And
Yeah,
what that then does for the Texans, like outcomes, it very much is on the offensive coordinator and on CJ Stroud to basically pull the team through. And thankfully, they're in a division where I think they're capable of doing that. But I almost wonder if they should have gone a bit harder on running back if they'd known that was going to be a problem. This feels like something that came on a bit too late for them to really act upon.
yeah, maybe.
So
And from sort of the language we're hearing about Mixon now, it sounds very much like if he plays rather than when he plays. And I think that again that shows it doesn't sound very good at all. Luckily, and I think again like it was last year, I think this defense can make it very very hard to beat Houston anyway because this defense is brilliant. Like it really is. I think I think it could end up as the number 1 defense in the league this season. That pass rush duo of Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson is like so fierce, and we saw quite a few times down the stretch last year. Like they won the team the game alone. Just literally. Like the Miami game was, the Miami game comes to mind first. As they were all over Tua that day, and he had a hip injury because of that game, and that's the Dolphin season then. But that that just wasn't the only game. It's the same in the Chargers game in the playoffs. It was so many games down the stretch. This pass rush won the Texans games on their own pretty much, and as a team, they were second for tackles for loss. They were 4th in sack percentage, whilst they also forced 29 takeaways, which was the 4th most in the NFL as well. Yeah, and obviously a big factor why in that secondary is Derek Stingley, who was named first team All Pro last year. He was one of the best corners in the NFL last year. 18 pass breakups, the second most in the NFL, and he very rarely allowed receptions too. And now they've added CJ Gardner-Johnson to that secondary as well. And it does sound like last year's second round pick, Kamari Lassiter, is having a breakout camp as well. So for me, this defense really is their path to victory this year. And then that makes it a lot easier for Stroud, who again I think is a brilliant quarterback. And with how good this defense is, should this offense get to an even above average level, in the AFC, you've got to imagine this team is a threat just because of what this defense can do.
It used to be a case with the Texans. It was, can they outscore the other team? And now it's, they can just defend and score enough. And sometimes that's all you need to be successful in this league. So, yeah, I think I look at all the names on that defense, and it's like I play a little bit of IDP, and I'm like, yeah, I would quite like all of them. So that's I feel like I've drafted all of them at least once somewhere. So it's even down linebackers, Alshire and Tutu. Carrying on my habit of picking up on funny names, having had Storm Duck last time I was on the show. But actually, Henry Tutu is one of those players that I quite like as well.
No, the front seven's great, and and then the secondary is this defense is still young as well. Like, their stars have still got like 2 or 3 years left of their rookie deal, which is just crazy. That's what I mean. Like this, there really is
going to be an expensive contract negotiation.
But that's what I mean. Like,
have to jump quick
because they went aggressive and had all those. They did Stroud and Anderson the same year. They'd still in the year before that. Like, because they were aggressive, they've got like this window now where they can have all those guys for cheap, and that's same with the Lions as well. Like they can, the Texans and the Lions, the way they've built these rosters the last couple of years is really really interesting. For sure.
You win this league.
Exactly. I think before we move on to the Colts, we've got to do the win total. The bookies have set the Texans line at 9.5 wins, whilst they have the 17th hardest schedule, or you could put it as like the 15th easiest schedule. If it's one of those where they just sort of middle of the road in the league in terms of toughness.
Basically.
Yeah. Which way are you leaning here at 9.5?
I'm considering the division that they're in. I'm saying over, because I feel like they've probably got the number on the other three most of the time. And I think that schedule is just about easy enough for them to at least get to double digits, in my opinion.
I absolutely agree with you. I wouldn't bet against them having 12 or 13 wins if we're being honest, and then therefore that will probably put them in the race for the 1 seed because all the other sort of AFC division contenders have got a much harder schedule because because they came first last year and haven't got to play the AFC South. But also I think they're a very well coached team. I think Matt Burt does a great job with the defense as well as obviously D'Amico Ryans as well, and then that we'll see what happens on offense. But in terms of like in-game adjustments and stuff, that that Ryans does a great job coaching this team, and I do think. I do think they'll be hard to beat this year, and I mentioned 12 or 13 games. The last time a team won more than 12 games in this division was the 2009 Colts, who ended up losing in the Super Bowl to the Saints. It's been a long time since we've had a sort of 12-win team in this division, and every team has won it as well since then. So it's certainly one of those ones that sort of rotates and everything. So we'll go over to the Colts now. Who are hoping to sort of break out of the middling area of the league that they've been in since Chris Ballard became general manager in 2017. They've been steady enough to keep in a job for 8 seasons, making the playoffs twice and having just 4 losing seasons. And only 2 of those losing seasons they had less than 7 wins. So they've certainly been decent enough to have them in a job. But in that tenure, they've only won 1 playoff game. And that was in his second season in 2018, which was Andrew Luck's last season before retiring. Since Luck retired, they've had... Yeah, exactly. Since Luck retired, there are 10 different quarterbacks that have started games, and that number will soon become 11 as Shane Steichen has named Daniel Jones as a team starter, quote, for the season after he beat Anthony Richardson in a quarterback competition over the off-season and training camp. Did this move surprise you? Or...
It did when it happened, and then I thought about it, and I don't know if people have seen, there has been a few social media posts recently about how Anthony Richardson is younger than basically like half of the rookies that got drafted this year, effectively, and a few of the players that you consider as young. He's still a very raw talent and was probably brought on much too quickly or was overhyped too soon, and the injuries have rocked probably his whole career prospects, in all honesty. But he was always inaccurate, and it kind of signals a bit of an idea with the Colts that you've kind of got a choice. With Richardson, you could plug him in for a year, but know that you're pretty much doomed to giving the ball away a lot, and you're going to have to pray that he develops. But he's developing in a high-pressure situation with a lot of media spotlight on him. Or you put Daniel Jones in, who is, I'll use serviceable as possibly the best adjective, who isn't necessarily going to have the pressure to deal with or the development arc, so to speak, but we'll give Richardson might get a chance in the background to develop and then have one more shot when next year, or if Daniel Jones has an absolute stinker, which a lot of people are sort of predicting that Richardson might end the season as the starting QB, but again, more in a developmental post when they're already out of the running for the playoffs, which I don't see as necessarily a bad idea. But it's obviously signaling that the Colts aren't necessarily expecting to be much in the running this year. They'll say differently. Of course they will. But it feels a little bit protection over performance.
Yeah, if I were a general manager and I knew my job was safe, I'd absolutely see what I have in Richardson because I've invested like a high draft pick in him, really high draft pick for 4th overall, and obviously the upside there is undeniable. But this team needs to win games because everyone knows they're stuck in a rut. Both Ballard and Steichen's jobs are at risk. You've got new ownership group as well, which we'll talk to you about in a minute. So I'm not surprised by this move whatsoever. And as soon as they signed Jones, I knew that he'd play at some point just because of it's a crucial season for the team. Richardson's in and out of the lineup all the time the last couple of years, and he probably does give them the best chance to win. But I also feel like they've got a very low ceiling with Daniel Jones.
Yes,
and that that's what level of play do you think we'll see from him?
I'm trying to think back to how he was with the other teams, and like the Giants, for example. But I'm there like he wasn't really rated anywhere, and
his best year,
kind of more of the same. Is pretty much
his best year was when Saquon Barkley had a really good season for the Giants after a couple of years injured. And again, that was a major reason why. And even then, they weren't great that season, winning 9 games, and they paid him off that. It very much reminds me of sort of Ryan Tannehill, the Dolphins. He had a decent season. Around 2015, and they paid him, and then they did that contract for 3 years, and they regretted it for ages. And I feel like this is exactly the same with the Giants, but they shouldn't have paid Daniel Jones because he was in that season where he was solid, doesn't turn the ball over, takes a lot of checkdowns, but when you have a run game, when you have an offensive line, because their offensive line wasn't that bad that year either, when you have that, he can put you in a position where you can maybe win one playoff game. But it's not because of Daniel Jones; it's because of the rest of the team. And and that's very much what I'm expecting. I feel like with this Colts team, I feel like maybe they can win 8 games, but are they going to win 8 games because of Daniel Jones? No, they're just going to win 8 games because they don't have someone turning the ball over, and throwing so many incomplete passes.
4 plays.
So I feel like the Colts are in a sort of a dangerous scenario here, because if he does win 8-9 games, which is entirely possible, because that's what they've done with with Joe Flacco and Gardner Minshew at quarterback the last couple of years, as well as Richardson. They're probably in a dangerous scenario where they don't want to be stuck in that again, because if you look at the guys they've had at quarterback in those times, Matt Ryan didn't work, Carson Wentz didn't work. Obviously, they had Nick Foles. They've had this Jacoby Brissett. These guys are all in the same mold of quarterback, and I think Daniel Jones
cast-offs from other teams who used to be something and then were not.
And Daniel Jones is in that. Philip Rivers, another one.
Things.
Yeah, really, really old Philip Rivers is another one. And Daniel Jones is in this mold of quarterback, and there's a reason why none of those guys are starting in the league anymore, right?
The thing is, if you think about who's playing for the teams that list of quarterbacks left, and you think of who took over from them, so you're like, Wentz left Philly, and Philly have got Hurts. Brissett left New England, and we've got Drake May. The sort of, this bodes well if you've got Jackson Dart anywhere. I think I'm not going to say Russell Wilson. That's not happening. But if it bodes well for Jackson Dart, I was going to say that. But I think the other thing that the Colts have got going for them in some respects, and they're not going for them at the same time, is the fact that they've not otherwise had an awful lot of roster turnover. They have one major offensive addition. I'm going to go into it now, because this is a guy I've waxed lyrical about in fantasy circles all off season. He is my guy, and it's Tyler Warren. And he's going to get peppered with targets. He is going
now.
To be,
Daniel Jones is there. Yeah.
Now Daniel Jones is the QB. Like, he's like my tight end to the moon if you're in fantasy circles, especially because I still think they're going to play from behind quite a bit as well. But he looks like a talent, and he looks like something that they've been tight end by committee for years. You've had Murray Cox, Kyle Granson, you've had a plethora of tight ends, none of which have ever really been a one. And now you have a focal point. And even in wide receiver, Josh Downs looks like he could be a talent if he had a QB that was even remotely consistent. Hopefully, Daniel Jones can give you a shot at that. Michael Pittman has been highly rated and then flattered to deceive a lot of times. And again, you don't know how much of that you can put on the QB carousel roulette of uncertainty. And then I feel like we've never seen Alec Pierce properly yet, apart from the odd 70-yard bomb when Richardson decided, I can't stay on my feet long enough. Let's just hurl it and hope Pierce is down there. So it'll be interesting, because it could be that one of those three massively breaks out, one of them ends up being a target monster, or they all three fade into the hedge like Homer Simpson as Tyler Warren completely takes over this offense and it's his baby. So it's so intriguing. And then the one thing that's an absolute, constant is Jonathan Taylor being there.
If he's healthy. That's
he's just got to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Because behind him, Khalil Herbert, Tyler Goodson, and then rookie DJ Giddens. Bearing in mind Herbert, let's be honest, in Chicago, had the opportunity and ability to usurp a few different running backs, let's be honest, to be at least the 2 or even the 1, since they don't really rate Swift. And he got released. So if Jonathan Taylor gets injured, I think you could probably start writing the obituary for them there.
Yes.
Or at least start looking at who's going to be going early in the draft and start concentrating your efforts on college football.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's an interesting one, because it is such an interesting year for the Colts, because it's the start of a new era for them after the change of ownership following the sudden death of their long-term owner Jim Irsay. His 3 daughters have now assumed control of the team. They may want a fresh start this off-season, and with the fact that neither the coach nor the general manager has a winning record since taking their jobs in the organization, those jobs are at risk, even though they have been decent. I think Ballard's job is more at risk than Steichen's, because obviously he's been there for 6 years longer. I think he's done quite a good coaching job, Steichen has, these last 2 years, to win all the games he has, and he's screamed really well to mask Richardson's flaws and win games with Flacco and Minshew. But and he did a great job at that in Philly with Jalen Hurts as well. But yeah, so I think it'd be harsh to fire Steichen because he's not had a quarterback to work with, and they've won 8 to 9 games the last 2 years with what they've had.
Yes.
But Ballard's an interesting one because he's drafted really well, and unlike many organizations, they actually retain those draft picks. So they don't. They're very, very quiet in free agency every year. They pay their own guys. It's a very odd organization, the Colts. So I kind of like that about them. But then but they don't go anywhere. And
it's the NFL's moved beyond it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the NFL moves around them.
You've continually made the wrong decisions at the one position that is the most important position at quarterback. Yeah. It's just so it's an interesting one, because there have absolutely been chances to be more aggressive at quarterback over the last years, and the Colts just sort of settled. So it's a fascinating year for them, isn't it? Because the new owners may want to clean house at the end of the year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if we're sat here next year talking about a monster rebuild where the coaching staff and the playing staff are massively remodeled, but at the same time they could just status quo it. But no, I think this year is very much do or die for the whole ethos of how that team is run, I suppose, and see how the new ownership system goes. Because who knows? It might just be a case of even if they decide to sell up shop again, which I'm hoping they don't. But if they sell it to another party at some point, then the word radical could get even wider.
Yes.
So it's very much a space to watch, but the defense is middle of the road.
They're decent. I think this team is decent in every area. They're okay everywhere. They're not.
And that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that they're okay, and there is nowhere where they are elite, and nowhere where they're terrible. But you have to have something extra to really get through these games. Otherwise, you just are, an 8-8 or 8-9 nowadays team, and there's nothing there that necessarily suggests that changing.
No, I think we'll see that. I think the one unit that could hold this team back is probably the secondary, because the pass defense sucked last year, and I wouldn't want to rely on Charvarius Ward at this stage of his career with all the injuries he's had and everything. The offensive line's good, especially the left side. The right side will be a bit different this year after losing the guys to Minnesota. Hopefully it's better this year so we can see the better Jonathan Taylor, as you said, because that's the most important thing, because then that will certainly help Daniel Jones. And the two guys that I think can be stars in this team, obviously you've mentioned one of them, Tyler Warren. The other one for me is Laiatu Latu. Last year was everyone's darling in the draft, and he had a decent rookie season, not the best, not like Jared Verse level, but he had a very, very decent rookie season. Hopefully this year he can, because if he can make plays in that defense, and that's something where you can look at them and go oh yeah, now they've got something that can push them over the edge in these games where they're just average. And again, Warren could be the next Brock Bowers because just of the quarterback he has, and the other guys in that roster not really having there's not that really have a superstar guy on that offense as a pass catcher. So I think those two guys could maybe change that, and they have got some young guys to build around. But this team, the Colts, are just the definition of mid at the minute, and with Daniel Jones as a quarterback, it's It's not changing, I don't think. Okay, that leads us nicely on to the win totals. They face a 12th easier schedule, so it's easier than the Texans. Obviously, they got a second place schedule. Whilst the bookies have set their line at 7.5 wins. Which way are you going?
I've gone under. I had 6 or 7 in my head. If the line had been 6.5, I'd have been sort of umming and ahhing. But at 7.5, I'm definitely going for the under. I think the Jonathan Taylor injury risk scares me. The quarterback potential scares me. I still think that they'll look better for that record, but I'm still saying under.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I've got written on my note right in front of me. I have 6 or 7 games is about right. So literally exactly what you said. Yeah.
Word for word.
Yeah, if you look at their schedule, right,
it's a tough. Dark card away.
No, it's a tough start to the year. They're facing some really good defenses, and I don't really trust Daniel Jones in that. They're also playing some good coaches as well. They've got Sean Payton, Pete Carroll, Sean McVay. They've got some really good coaches early in the year, and that doesn't really fill me with confidence for this team. So I am going to go for the under. I think I just can't see Daniel Jones winning those kind of games. I feel like they're probably going to be 4-4, and then they have some difficult away games, like they have to go to Arrowhead and stuff like that later in the year. They've got the game in Germany as well. I just feel like 6 or 7 games is about right. Maybe 8 wins, but that's just a maybe. They won't be bad. They're not going to be bad. They're going to be a competitive team for most of the year. Probably go out of playoff contention probably week 17. They're going to be there or thereabouts. But I just think there are better teams, especially in the AFC. So. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going for the under. Okay, we'll go to the Jags now, who will look very different this season. Very different of all the teams, I'd imagine, after 2 very disappointing years that followed one of the craziest playoff wins in recent memory against the Chargers. It's been two hellish years for them, really. It started great, and then they just crumbled 2 years ago, and then this year, the year just gone, they were not great at all. It took a little while. Yeah, it took a little while for the Khan family to really decide what they wanted to do to change the direction of this franchise. Initially they fired Doug Peterson very early, started the head coaching search with GM Trent Baalke still in post, but they really struggled to find a guy who wanted to be a head coach whilst Baalke was still general manager. So they fired him really late in the process, attempting to re-attract their number one candidate, Liam Cohn, who was with the Bucs as the offense coordinator last year. He had originally turned down the job after being in the process for a little bit because of Baalke. He told the Bucs he was going to stay as their offensive coordinator. Then he went AWOL, and about a day later, he was suddenly announced as the Jags head coach again. And they had a new general manager shortly after, named a friend of his, James Gladstone. They worked together in LA. He becomes the league's youngest ever general manager at 34, and he was in charge of the Rams scouting whilst Cohen was there working as an offensive assistant with the Rams, and then he left to work with Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay after they worked well together in that really weird renaissance Baker had in that Thursday night game where he just won that. He just won that game out of nowhere. So it's his first year not working with Baker Mayfield for a little bit. He's been hired to try and help Trevor Lawrence and reach his potential and cut down on turnovers as well. Whilst Gladstone has been hired to improve the team's draft strategy, which has been criticised in recent years. And the pair have started their tenure with a bang by trading up with the Cleveland Browns to select Travis Hunter, who becomes the first player to be drafted and announced as both an offensive and defensive player. A needed fresh start in Jacksonville. What do you make of their off-season?
Mental. It's one way to describe it. It's tumultuous. It's not ideal necessarily, but they've got what they kind of wanted in the end. Whether it happened, it took a lot longer than they were hoping, I don't know, but at least they got there. And the work begins now, I guess. I don't think that there's been enough time with them under the desk that this season is going to be the one where we notice a radical improvement. I think it'll be incremental. I think they're going to be slightly better. I don't necessarily think that the moves they've made this offseason are going to make them better immediately. But at the same time, I don't think they can be much worse than they have been the last year and a half. So you've got a fan base who are quite used to low expectations and barely making them. So it's, they had one season of absolute, ridiculous incredibleness that then got blown out by a stupid refereeing decision that I will never forgive. But it's still sore. That Jags shirt is my wife's, and she still moans about it now. Not even kidding. But it's interesting. Travis Hunter has clearly been, they traded up, and they traded up a reasonable amount of stuff to get up to number 2 to sign him, to have a two-way player. They still say they want to play him more on offense than defense, but they are still giving him training reps in both positions. I feel like it's one of those where you've got to use him in both, otherwise you've pretty much wasted the pick, because he wasn't the wide receiver one on the board by that, and certainly not by that far. You were better getting him for the novelty factor, or basically the fact that you get 2 positions with one player, so you're effectively getting 2 players for one roster spot.
He's a first-round talent at both receiver and corner.
Yeah, and first-round talent in both positions, and the fact that in terms of like name value and reputation, one thing the Jags haven't done well in recent terms is have players that have rep, or at least that are not just reputable but marketable and popular, and are going to excite the fan base essentially. And Hunter is definitely one of those that's going to have a lot of eyes on him, a lot of it for the two-way aspect. And the Jags kind of need that kind of attention to stop just accepting mid as a standard. He's going to spur them all on. I still worry about the rest. I mean, I love the fact that Brian Thomas looks elite, and Hunter's not going in as the team's number 1 with a high expectation. He's going in as that team's 2, so that he also has the ability to affect both sides of the ball, because Brian Thomas is going to be the linchpin in the offense. If Trevor Lawrence can do under Liam Cohen what Baker Mayfield did, that's where it gets interesting.
Well, yeah, it's a QB-friendly scheme. Like, obviously, these guys that come up, these very Shanahan guys, this West Coast offense is very catered to, developing quarterbacks, because it allows, there are multiple things. Obviously, the run game is really important in this scheme, and that's one thing that you look at the Jags and I think,
we'll get to that in a second.
But like basically the way to develop a quarterback now is to have a young offensive head coach who knows a scheme, and a quarterback who is can do something, and then hopefully
you can mold into that scheme,
exactly.
And who is willing to listen and take it on. And I think Lawrence will be, because of the dross he's had before him. I think he'll be quite happy to have a fresh start, and I think the system will work, but I suspect it might take a season really for it to turn around, which, funnily, getting back to the running back situation, might be what the Jags need anyway, because I think it's going to be a roulette between Etienne, Bigsby, Tootin, maybe even LaQuint Allen gets in there later on. But I think those three running backs might be in a little bit of a carousel. I think Etienne will still be seen as a starter at the beginning of the year. I think Bigsby will probably have his role, and I think Tootin will start taking over a little bit later on. But I don't think necessarily I'd trust any of them in my fantasy world. But
no, absolutely not.
I think next year they will probably set aside a lot of plan for a running back, be it free agency or the draft. And I think that they may look for I'm not going to say bell cow, but certainly a heavy usage starter that makes the system click, almost as the missing piece. That's the player I want next season.
Yeah, I think that's what you need. Yeah, I agree. And yeah,
they need someone with Fournette's caliber, but actually living up to it.
Yeah, yeah, I don't.
I say that with that being the Fournette jersey behind.
Yeah,
but that's what they need.
And
the whole defense.
They're going to be. We'll go on to the defense. They're going to be interesting this year, because they are people are going to tune in to watch the Jags. We had this conversation about the Bears last week. People are going to tune in to watch the Jags because they want to see, now Trevor
Travis
Lawrence is
Hunter on both sides.
and now Trevor Lawrence is free from Press Taylor, and and because Doug Peterson didn't even, the fact that he didn't even at one point think I'm going to take over calling plays or anything, it's just crazy how a man with that much, he's won a Super Bowl and yet he doesn't even think, this offense is failing. Why am I not taking over play calling or whatever like that? Anyway, so now they've got a competent offensive play caller in there for Trevor Lawrence, which he's not had. He's either had the in fact, literally, he's not had that.
No,
and
you were thinking who was before that? Urban Meyer.
it's like,
Move on, please.
Literally, it's just literally like, so again, they're going to be watchable because of that, and selfishly as well, like, thinking as like a UK media member, like having a player like Travis Hunter playing for the Jags is just excellent for the game over here, because you're going to get him at least once a season. You're going to get him on UK TV. This, as as a British media member, that is exactly what you want. I think it's going to make the Jags really interesting over here. You mentioned it earlier. It's hard to be worse than last year. They'll be looking at the potential this roster has, and they will be targeting the playoffs, because obviously they won 9 games 2 years before last year. They won a playoff game with a team that's not too dissimilar from this 3 years ago. Like this, this team, if they don't reach the postseason year 1, it's okay, because it's not the end of the world whatsoever. It's a new regime. But there is a ton on this roster that's waiting to be improved, and that's the thing they're improved, because I feel like they've been horribly coached the last couple of years, and especially on defense, as you say, with the resources they've invested in that defense, right? It is absolutely no business being the number 31 defense last year. No business whatsoever, because you got 2 first-round pick edge rushers. You've got a really, really expensive interior defensive line. You've got linebackers who are really good, and I think, and then the DBs are an interesting group, but I don't think they were really that bad. Bad compared to some.
Make them look.
Yeah, exactly, and
I think that's just because they were used so much.
Exactly, and I think that front 7 on paper is absolutely tremendous. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the new DC Anthony Campanile, who comes over from the Packers. Before that, he was with the Dolphins as well. Again, someone who he knows Cone, that whole trio of people well.
Yeah.
This defense will, it can't be any worse than last year. Obviously, being number 31, and I don't think it's been number 32. But it is a completely new scheme. I'm interested to see, because again, this could be, if Lawrence hasn't been bad. If he can just get to a sort of decent level where he doesn't take many sacks and turn the ball over, if they can have a decent-ish run game where they, by committee, and if defense can go to maybe 16th in the league, this team might be a playoff team. That's it's just on talent they should be. It's just whether enough's going to turn round in 1 year, isn't it?
Let's get back to the start of the show. The range of outcomes is absolutely wild, and I think the Jags might be the widest range of outcomes. You say the talent's there. I think truthfully, and I think even Jags fans might admit to this. This year is a free hit. This is the development year where whatever comes out of it, great. If we're still developing and we're low, we'll get a decent pick, nail 1 or 2 really big needs next year, and then we should be in a position to be able to go for it in free agency and in the draft as well. Next year is the focus. This year is very much a take the rough with the smooth. And if by some miracle the world decides that they're competitive and that they have got a chance, then good luck next season for the other teams, really. I think they'll be hoping for that, but let's not overhype them too quickly.
The priority this year for the Jags is getting the best out of Trevor Lawrence. That's it. And to do that, you've got to keep him healthy. The offensive line, I am a little bit worried about it. I don't think they've done enough to improve it still. It's like 3 or 4 years I've been saying this. Really, I'm not sure only adding Patrick McCarry was enough to fix this offensive line. Hopefully the young players in that line can take another step, and obviously they invested a first round pick last year in that area, or 2 years ago with Harrison. But this I think it can. be a success even if they don't make the playoffs. I think again it's just about if you can develop Lawrence, because he's been a solid sort of 17 to 20 quarterback. He had 1 year maybe was maybe on that 13, 14 range. You drafted him to be a
101.
top 10 quarterback. You drafted number 1 overall because he had every trait desirable that you want a quarterback to have. Best prospects in Andrew Luck. We hear all that. At that time, obviously, what he did with that Clemson
It's
team.
so long ago.
Yeah, exactly. We've not really seen that guy. I think that's a priority this year, and that sort of leads us on to the prediction segment, because their line's been set at 7.5 wins, whilst they face the 7th easiest schedule. So it is an interesting variable
I
here.
hate this line so much because it's so right.
Yeah. Which way you going?
Yeah. My notes are they will win more than the Colts, but I wasn't sure whether the Colts would get 6 or 7, and my head went, well, that means that the Jags are 7 or 8.
Mm.
With 7.5 as the line, I went. Basically, I didn't want to upset the wife, so I went over. I think 8. I think 8 wins reality, but a lot of why I'm saying over is because that range of outcomes, I think they could be anywhere from 11 to 4.
Mm.
So, and again, where does that put halfway? About 7.5. And I feel like they've got more chance of new coaching team beginners luck and what's the word? Enthusiasm. There we go.
New
Don't
coach
curve it.
bounce. You get that a lot. A lot of time when you
the
get a
new
new coach, the
bounce.
first year is often
they get
first
off
and
to
third
a
years.
start, I think if I remember, they've got one of the easiest opening 4-game schedules after maybe the Texans, ironically. They've got one of the easiest start-offs to the season, and if they get off to a decent start and get some momentum rolling and get some belief rolling, that might just be the tonic they need. So I just felt like there was more chance of them going over, overachieving that halfway point than under. But again, it could all stay crumble cookie for another year potentially. But as long as they develop and they know what they need, they'll be happy.
I agree with you. Yeah, I'm going for the over as well. If it were 8.5, again, I think I would really sit here and consider the under.
I'd have planted it on what 8 wins is.
But with that schedule, I'm pretty confident the Jags will get to at least 8 wins. And obviously, again, let's not forget they're a 19 win the last 2 years. That's a 9-win team. And this team is better than those teams, I think, talent wise. Because I thought last year they were going to be really good because the moves they made, and they just were very poorly coached. So I think I'm going to go for the over. Fringe playoff team. I feel like 8-9 wins about right, and then we'll see what happens there. They'll be competing right to the end, but I think they probably will just miss out. But I think the over here is a pretty good bet, personally. Right, we'll finish off the podcast with the Titans, who are heading into the second year under head coach Brian Callahan, who they hired after his work with Joe Burrow as the Bengals offensive coordinator. He was hard to try and get the best out of Will Levis after an impressive final few games in Levis's rookie season. And they believed in Levis because GM Rand Carthen went really aggressive from free agency last year to surround Levis with tons of talent. But the mini rebuild did not really work out, with their big acquisition L'Jarius Sneed out for a lot of the season for injury, as was their center Lord Cushenberry, who they brought in that season as well. And Levis struggled massively as well behind the offensive line that wasn't great, and he was benched throughout the year for Mason Rudolph as well. And then they lost the final 6 games of the season, which saw them fall to the number 1 overall pick after winning just 3 games. And that resulted in Rand Carthen losing his job. And at the end of the season, he was replaced by the Chiefs' assistant general manager, Mike Borgonzi. So it's a new era in Nashville. They've got a new GM, and they use that number 1 overall pick to get a new starting quarterback in Cam Ward. He's going to be starting right away, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. You looking forward to seeing a bit of hope at quarterback for the Titans this year, at least?
I'm looking forward to it on the basis that I'm really intrigued by what is going to happen with what is essentially the least hyped number 1 overall pick I can ever remember. In that, all the talk has been over, Hunter, all your wide receivers that have gone as well, and
And
I've heard
Shador. All the talk was Shador before the
the Shador fall got way more airtime than Cam Ward did at 101, and because it was seen as a foregone conclusion, and it's just like, yeah, we'll go to the Titans, yeah, there's no drama. There's barely question marks, but that's because no one's really dived into it. And I don't know if that's just because people have written the Titans off so quickly that it's like, yeah, just throw them to the Lions. But I mean, that's what it used to be when the Lions were rubbish. But it'll be. I'm really intrigued because it's can he prove that it was Levis that was just the problem, and can it be that one player really can turn the franchise around? Because if he does, and he does it from the least hype possible, a lot of analysts and a lot of experts are just going to look stupid. Everyone's going to be coming around and say, yeah, well, it was the 101. Yeah, but no one's decided to say that giving the Titans the best quarterback in the draft and letting him start is going to make them better. It's like all you're doing is plugging him in there because that's just what happens. But I think a lot of the action that's happened around it, you mentioned Sneaker coming back from injury, Cushenberry coming back from injury, Dan Moore comes in at left tackle, Kevin Zeitler at right guard. Those things give them a much more solid footing than they had before. I have fears over the wide receiver core. Calvin Ridley looks like he's already built up an incredible chemistry just from the camps and preseason. Him and Cam Ward look like they're going to be quite a decent pairing. After that, it's the depth chart I've got up at the moment has Van Jefferson, Tyler Lockett, L.A.K. Umenor, the rookie, and Chimere Dike, the other rookie, and Xavier Restrepo, another free agent acquisition from who wasn't drafted, an undrafted free agent.
Undrafted, yeah.
He
was in Miami with Cam Ward as well.
Yeah. And that, which again, chemistry is a thing, makes Chigakonkwo look quite promising as well. But he's had years where he's had a chance to develop into something big and hasn't necessarily. But I think he's been much better in the protection game. So in terms of the actual passing offense, I think they might be relying on someone like Aomino to come in and sort of develop quickly. If Lockett can, still be the reasonable player he was in Seattle, if I don't see Van Jefferson coming up too much, having seen what he was like in Pittsburgh last year. That's why they need Aomino to step up quickly. But if that comes to pass, it'll be great. I think this is going to be one where Ward gets a year now to settle in, and they may have to retool the weapons next year a little bit. Yeah. I know they spent an awful lot of money getting Calvin Ridley off the Jags.
Well, he was their only acquisition last year that worked out. Yeah, really, like the rest of them didn't really work out. Obviously, Sneed will see because Cushenberry will see because they've just not played. Yeah. But
I think the thing is, it took an awful lot of money to get him off the Jags, but I think he might be the one. As you say, it was the decision that they ultimately looked like they might have got right because him and Ward now does look like a partnership. But then running back room, Tajay Spears' injury status right now is a concern because the 1-2 punch with him and Tony Pollard has the bones to be, very much serviceable. So they look good as a 2 for a bottom end, for a number 1 overall pick team.
The Jags would love that. Would love that running back room.
Oh heck yeah! If you give the Jags Tony Pollard over Travis Etienne now,
yeah.
I'd accept, Bigsby and Tootin for Spears and whoever you want to choose as being the Titans 3. Khalil Mullings, I think, is 3 on the depth chart at the minute. He was a 6th round pick this year. But there's a few, other pieces that I suppose, if another injury happened to Pollard, I think they'd be scrambling into the free agent market. I don't think they'd necessarily be promoting from within.
Or looking at someone like Brian Robinson, maybe, who's obviously in the trade block.
The trade market for Robinson, etc. So if they have aspirations of not being at the bottom again as well, which we're assuming that they're going to aim for the playoffs this year, and
that was their plan last year. That was
the plan last year, and look what they got. It's still a strange one, but if Tajay Spears needs to be back sooner rather than later to at least give them the 1-2 punch. Pollard can't cope with that workload on his own, especially with Ward's supporting cast, so to speak. But Pollard showed times last year that he is willing to put in the tough yards when it's a team that is struggling. He played very well
behind a terrible
given
offensive line
circumstances.
Yeah.
And in a team now that has a better chance of at least not being behind by loads all the time because they've got a competent QB and not a terrible defense, he might actually flourish a little bit. And I'm almost more interested in seeing what Pollard does. In his, again, fantasy brain, he's one I have picked up a lot.
Same here.
Just because his draft position is so low.
Yeah, same here.
Because I think a lot of people are thinking that Spears is the one, and the injury is probably put paid to that. But if you watched last season, Pollard looked very good.
Yes.
And if the team's going to be better, he's only going to score more points.
Exactly. And I think I'm really high on Cam Ward. I think it'll surprise people with how good he is this year because people forget how much he's seen in college. He's like Bo Nix. He's had 5 years as a college starter. He's like the opposite of Anthony Richardson. He's had 5 years as a college starter. He's been in multiple schools. He's had multiple offenses. He has literally seen so much, which is what you want for a rookie coming into a team like this. That's exactly what you want. And I think that will really help the transition to the pros. And he has a very strong arm, really strong arm, which is like the big selling point. You want it up there in the league. Obviously, it's always a bonus, but for me, the thing that impresses me the most about Ward is his ability to perform under pressure. He's does it in such a calm measure and manner, and that's what all the elite quarterbacks have. That's the trait, and that's what I love about Jaden Daniels last year because he just when in those late game scenarios, Jaden Daniels, it wasn't the arm, it wasn't his speed, it was his brain that really stood him above. It is, and that what he did in big moments last year, and I can see the same happening for Ward. Obviously, the league is quicker than college, of course, and it may take a while to see it, but he played so well, especially. Miami. That Miami defense was horrendous last year, and he'd always be there late in the game trying to win the game and be so cool and calm under pressure, and that's very few rookies, very few college players are like that. It's something you develop, and I feel like I think he's in for a good career once he sort of gets a supporting cast, and obviously we've got a guy who's worked with Joe Burrow, who's another quarterback who is very similar in that mold where his football IQ is brilliant, and I think this is a really good fit for Ward. I really do feel like he's been slept on. But last year for me, he was a clear number one quarterback. I had him as a top 10 pick, like even before he had a snap in Miami because I knew what he'd seen, in all these places he's played. He's been in a very strange offense at Washington State. He's played a lot of football, and this is going to be so crucial for a team like this. And I think that's huge. And I think this defense as well. It's one of the strangest things I've ever seen. Right, they're number 30 in scoring defense, but in total defense they're number 2 last year. One of the strangest things I've ever seen. Yeah, it's, and obviously it's because Will Levis kept turning the ball over and giving them terrible field position to then defend, and that's why, because I think this defense could be really good this year because they don't have those constant terrible field positions
all the time.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it is because. Yeah, exactly. I feel like the defensive line has got to be up there for me. Obviously, Jeffrey Simmons is one of the best in the league on the interior, and then you've got Sebastian Joseph Day, who's no starts next to him, and Tavondre Sweat had a really good rookie year as well, and he'll be getting better this year as well. Obviously, they have lost Harold Landry. He's gone to work with Mike Vrabel in New England again, which is a shame. But obviously Arden Key had a good year a couple of years ago. I feel. They're a pass rusher away from being a really good defense. Obviously, you've got Snead coming back. What their defensive coordinator Denard Wilson did last year with the defensive back when Snead was gone was really impressive because without L'Jarius Snead, they were still the number 1 passing defense. Which is just and that's without L'Jarius Snead, and they've lost Jadebi Awuzie, but then you've got Snead coming back. You've got some young guys in that secondary as well. I just feel like I thought this team is being really slept on. I personally do, because of how bad
They
Levis was last year. And no, but we're being honest. It's the case. The thing to watch this year, the Titans, is the offensive line, because last year it was one of the worst units in the league, and that's with the best offensive line coach in the league in Bill Callahan, who's Brian Callahan's dad. They paid a lot of money to get him from the Browns. And then you saw the Browns' offensive line just completely regress last year, but they didn't have him in there as well. Like the value this man has as an offensive line, right, and as an offensive line coach is crazy. And even then, it wasn't that great last year. They've changed it this year. They've Nicholas Petty-Frere's not there anymore. There's no Dylan Radence. As I mentioned, they brought in Dan Moore, Kevin Zeitler, and they've moved JC Latham to right tackle, which is where he played at Alabama as well. So he'll be more comfortable as well in his second season too. And Moore play left tackle. If this unit picks up and plays as well as I've been hearing in training camp, and there's this video going on in the preseason of Ward having like 6 seconds to throw, just standing there waiting. And that's completely different to what was the case last year. This offensive line can really. Zeitler's a big addition, obviously, because he's come over from Detroit, and before that he was in Baltimore, and one of the best guards in the league. This offensive line has so much potential. If it can perform again, I think the Titans are really a sleeper to maybe not make the playoffs, but at least get be competitive. Because I feel like with that defense, with a guy who's calm under pressure at quarterback, with an offensive line that could be decent, with that run game, I feel like the Titans could be hard to beat this year.
See my closing comment with the Jags. Massive range of outcomes.
Yeah.
Could go any which way. Still probably a development season, and give them a few more pieces in next off season. Get them into next season. Then they will see themselves in a bit of a matchup. And it's one of those where we said at the beginning of the show, like, how are we looking with this division this season? Complete and utter unknown. There is a genuine chance, especially if Indy blows it up. If they have the rotter this year and decide to blow it all up with a new coaching staff and a new team, you could end up with all 4 teams being competitive next season and looking like strong enough contenders for a playoff spot. You could have a wild division next season, and anything could jump it now.
But also, that's what I mean. You could genuinely make an argument for all 4 of these teams having a winning record because of the division they're in. Now they won't go in. Some of them won't go very far at all. Houston's the one that can go far in the playoffs. No one else can. But you can make You can make a genuine, prediction saying that all these 4 teams could have a winning record.
Yeah.
Obviously they're not all going to have a winning record, but like individually, if things happen, they could all potentially end up. There could be scenarios where each team could end up as something like that. Yes. I think that's a good point to move on to now with obviously the win total. We'll finish the podcast with that. Now the Titans have the 26th hardest schedule, so the 6th easiest schedule, a pretty easy one, but their line is set at 5.5 wins. For me, if this offensive line is a real deal, I'm having the over. I really am. I don't think it's a playoff team, don't get me wrong, but can I see this team winning 6, 7, 8 games? Yeah, I can. And give me the over on the Titans at 5.5 wins.
That was an easy over as well.
Mm.
Easy over.
Yeah, isn't it? It's just like I just feel like I feel like some of them. I honestly have them. I probably, if I was to make a guess right now, I do my predictions on a podcast the week of the season starting. I think both teams probably end up 6-10, 7.
I think the Titans and the Jags end up with the same record, and the Colts below them.
Yeah,
and given I said that the Jags could get 8, then I was in a similar boat with Tennessee. Maybe 1 win less, but I think a lot of that division's ranking is going to come to them playing each other.
Yeah,
and then obviously, outside of the obvious injuries and everything else, and that's always the mystery that you have going into every year is who's going to be the big player that gets injured that ruins a team's season. And it's funny how you look at, QB injuries aside, because that will derail any team pretty much, unless you are the Saints, where you have 2 and you don't like either of them. If you ignore that, is there really one player on the Titans that you'd think, if they're out, game over? Calvin Ridley, maybe, but
I think Ridley's the one.
They do something.
Yeah, we saw with Snead last year that passing defense was still decent. So I feel like he'd be the only other. Before what I saw last year, I thought he would have been up there as well. But no, I think Ridley is the one. Yeah. So if he can stay healthy, then you've got to imagine they're going to be there or thereabouts, competing with pretty much every team because of what they have. That they are very much like the Colts, where they're very solid in most areas, but I do feel like they have more superstars than the Colts do. So I think that's the difference there. Right, that's going to do it for today's episode. We only have 3 of these episodes left before the 2025 season, so we'd love to hear your thoughts on how your team is shaping up heading into week 1. So let us know what you think. Hit us up on Twitter at 410yards or drop your thoughts in the comments below. But thank you to James for joining me today. It was a pleasure to have you on again, mate. And if you enjoyed the podcast, a quick rating or review on Spotify, our podcast would be great. It really helps us out. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button and go down to hit notifications so you get notified when we upload next. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button as well, so it comes up on your feed. I'll be back either Sunday or Monday. We'll see what happens with who the Saints name is quarterback. Then we'll probably do a podcast then when we know, because obviously the next podcast is the NFC South.
Probably won't know then.
Yeah. But until then, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.